How do we become more like Jesus? And what was he like when people didn't treat him so well? How did he live toward other people that hated him, or people that just did things that weren't appropriate in the way that God would have things to be done? How did Jesus care about people? How did Jesus deal when people treated him badly? That's our study right now. This study, this day, and the next few videos on Whispering Hills. Thanks for joining. This is about the 1500th time I've said Whispering Hills, when it's Whispering Heights. But a part of this ministry has to do with the brain damage that I have and how to grow past that and how to grow on from it. And just how to live for Jesus when things aren't so easy to do. So we're going to let that go for right now. I want to go back in time to my first ministry where things went pretty well, but I left after 2 years. Should never left. I always said that the worst decision I ever made in ministry was to leave my first ministry. And then I went to a second ministry. I moved down to Tennessee, and I love Tennessee. But what I found there was a den of trouble. Yeah. I think I went there because the people seemed to have the same kind of ideas that I had. Well, had back then. Don't have right now. They were more wanted things to be exactly the way that they thought the Bible was teaching, and everyone else was wrong. And there were certain things that the Bible had to be and do, and how Christian people had to think and live and do according to their doctrines. My first church, some of their doctrinal ideas weren't mine, and so I had to leave there. And I went to Tennessee. Boy, did I find a lesson there for myself. I want to share that with you today. And then the next time we get together, I want to talk about how we can take those lessons and learn in our own life as to how to actually become a person that's like Jesus. The people at my second church were very legalistic in the way that they thought about things. And I thought that was just great. But the legalism kept getting pointed at me. That wasn't so great. Because it turned out that some of their ideas and some of my ideas weren't anywhere the same. No more than the relationship I had with one particular person. His name was Bill. Long time ago, I'm sure that Bill's long gone. I haven't seen that church, been to that church in 40 years. I'm not even going to tell you the name of the church or where the church was, other than it was in Tennessee, and I'm sure Bill's gone. Bill asked me one day, would you mind going with me tonight to the church camp? And you can meet some people, and it'll be fun, and it's a long drive out there, but we'll get something to eat, and we'll have a good time. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that, because I love going to church camp, and I'll get to meet some folks, and I'll go there next summer and spend some time there. Great. So we went. And all the way out there, was probably 2-hour drive there and 2-hour drive back. Things seemed fine on the way, and then we went, and I did meet some people, and it was a good experience. But the way home was a whole different story altogether. I was quite surprised when Bill started talking about his anger and bitterness, specifically toward black people. And the more we drove along back toward the church, back to where my car was set, and they're right by the churchyard, the more it went on and the more he had to say about it. And by the time we got to the church, I was ready to go. I'd had enough of it. At first, it seemed okay, but the longer we went, the more I realized there were some real issues here. So when we got to the church, he shut off the engine and he turned around and he looked at me and he says, "You know, the next big war in this country is going to be between the whites and the blacks." At that point, I shut my mouth. I didn't know where this was going. He continued. He says, "You know, we're going to have a war far worse than the one we had before. And this time we're going to end all of this problems between white and black people." He said, "I'll tell you what's going to happen." He says, "I'm thinking about joining the KKK. I hear it's a pretty good organization, and I'm wanting to look into that and see what that's really all about." Again, I kept my mouth shut. And I was thinking to myself, "You're thinking about joining it? You are already in it. That's obvious to me." The fact that I didn't say anything to him, I think, indicated to him that I had no interest in that. And as far as I know, it was the last conversation him and I ever had about that until my last day at the church. But I did have a conversation with his son-in-law. Now, his son-in-law was exactly the opposite of this guy. We'll call him Larry. I liked Larry. Larry was fun. But Larry and Bill didn't get along. Bill didn't like Larry. Larry was like, I don't know. Bill ain't that bright. I don't care. What do I care? Bill didn't like Larry because, well, first of all, Larry had been in prison. And then he had the audacity to marry my daughter, who had been married to somebody else. Terrible situation. He hated Larry. And Larry just thought, well, he's kind of dumb. He says, in fact, Larry says to me one day, he says, "Let me tell you, we'd gone and we talked about," because Larry and I were friends. I mean, I liked him. He was an older gentleman. He was kind of a cool guy, and he turned his life around. He was fun. I liked him. So I talked to him about some of the things with what was going on, and he says, "Let me tell you one day." One day he stops and he says, let me just tell you. Let me tell you something." He says, "Let me tell you how dumb this man is." I said, "Okay, go ahead." He says, "Well, you know, he doesn't like me because I've been in prison. You know, he doesn't like me because I'm a Baptist." I said, "Yeah, I know that. Which is the worst?" He said, "I don't know. I think it might be the Baptist part. I'm not sure." But one day, he says, him and I had a conversation. And they were talking about Baptists and how I needed to leave the Baptist church and come to his church and all that kind of stuff. So I looked at him and I said, "You know, Bill," he said, "if it wasn't for Martin Luther, we'd all be Catholic anyhow." And he kind of laughed. Bill didn't find that funny. Bill said, "Let me tell you something." He says, "No blankety, blankety, blankety black man ever started the Christian church." When Larry told me that, I couldn't believe that somebody was that. I mean, that's ignorant. First of all, I found out how much he really does despise people of color. Secondly, he didn't know who Martin Luther was. He thought they were talking about Martin Luther King. He didn't realize he was talking about a church man from hundreds of years ago that helped get the church move from the Catholic Church into Protestantism. He had no understanding of this whatsoever. I couldn't believe it. And Larry says, yep. He says, you're never going to make it with this guy because he hates people, he's angry, and he's stupid. That's what Larry told me. It's kind of a difficult story to tell. It's kind of scary when you think about it. And perhaps the names are changed to protect the innocent. Maybe they're not. Maybe I'm just that stupid. I don't know. Well, things moved around for about a year. And the longer I was there, the harder it was because I didn't get along with these people. I didn't see eye to eye with them. They didn't see eye to eye with me. I don't think they cared much for me. There wasn't much I was doing that was going to help anybody. They didn't like the way I did business. Honestly, I don't think they liked the fact that I was from the North. A whole different group of people. One like I'd never seen before, and one that made me wish, boy, wished I was back where I was before I came here, because it was pretty nice. And I learned something about legalism, and I learned something about how to treat people, and I learned something about what does it mean to become Christ-like. Or at least I started to learn that. It took me a lot of years to learn that. I'm still learning that. What really is a Christian? And what is Christianity gone bad? I don't even know if you can call that Christianity or not. Because it had nothing to do with becoming in the image and the likeness of Jesus Christ. Well, it was a year later, and it was time for, things were bad. It was Easter. I didn't know if I was going to make it. And the day after Easter, we had a board meeting. They waited so that everything would be nice for Easter, and then they were going to, here comes the bang. And so I was about to get let go. And that was okay with me. I was ready to go. I'd had all I could take of those stories and many, many more. And it wasn't just that, gentlemen. There was a lot of stuff that just didn't make much sense to me. And I'm sure I didn't make much sense to them. But I remember on that night, one of the interesting things, two interesting things happened, actually. First of all, that board argued for almost an hour as to whether or not, this was after they had the meeting, before the meeting where they decided that I was going to go. And so they let me know that it was time for me to go, but then they started arguing with one another of whether it was that I had whether or not I had been fired or had I resigned. And this went on, like I said, for about an hour, back and forth and back and forth. They didn't want me to be fired. They didn't want that because, you see, the minister that was there before me wasn't there very long, and he was fired. And they just didn't want that on their record. The second preacher in a row gets fired. So back and forth they went, and finally I'd had about all of that I could take. And I stood up and I said, gentlemen, I said, I've had about enough of this. I don't care whether I was fired. I don't care whether I resigned. It doesn't matter to me. But I'll tell you what, as of this moment of this night, you can write it down on your reports. I resign. I quit. Effective immediately. And then Bill said to me, You know what your problem is? I said, what's that? You're prejudiced. That's your problem. I couldn't believe it. That is what he said to me. And then I don't know if, I think it was him. It might have been somebody else. And by the way, not everybody was against me there. There were some good people there. But, and then what I was told was this. You have 30 days to get out of that, the parsonage. If you're not out in 30 days, he said, then we will start charging you for the use of that building. And if you don't leave shortly after that, guess what? You're going to be taken out by the police. I said, gentlemen, let me tell you something. I don't have a pot to pee in. I don't have any money. I don't have anywhere to go. And as far as I'm concerned, guess what? I'll be out in 30 days. And I was. That's a story that could have had a lot more to it. But I'm sharing where I'm at with that with you right now. I'm storing what I remember. Oh, it's long. That was almost 30 years ago. Because there's a lot to learn there. And it's not about being angry at the church or anything. Or, you know, a lot of churches are great. A lot of church people are great people. A lot of godly people. But there's some people that don't know Jesus. And I fear that so many people wanting to think that they are godly are so far from God and don't know how God really is or how to become like him. So, the next few messages, we're going to talk about how to become in the likeness of God and what Jesus' character is like and how we can become like him. Hope this has been helpful, and we'll be back shortly with more from Whispering Hills.